cheat sheet here. I'm not doing this professional. I want it from the heart. 24 times in the New Testament, we have to deal with the word hell. All right? So what happens 24 times in the New Testament? What do we end up with? We end up with Jesus talking about hellfire. Now, I got to give you a little bit of history first. In the Old Testament, there was a valley. I think in the Old Testament it calls it Hinnom. Hinnom Valley? I'm not sure. I think it's Hinnom. Again, this is off the cuff. I can go back and look, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. The Valley of Hinnom. And they built a nice little statue there, and it had its arms out like this. Okay? Or maybe together, I don't know. But anyway, the arms were out like this, and this statue just looked forward. I think it was a half bird and a half man. I don't know. But if you get into pagan things, you'll learn what this is, or if you look it up. This was called Moloch worship, worshiping of Moloch. And it's also Baal worship, same thing. You've read in the Bible, I'm sure. You offered your children up to Baal, Moloch, same thing. Here's the nice little ritual that the nice old Jews did in the Old Testament. And you have to wonder why God rejected them. They would take their newborn son, their firstborn son, which God says are his. God says their firstborn are his. You find that all in the Old Testament, okay? Firstborn are God's. They're redeemed unto God. So anyway, they take this little baby boy, and they lay it in the arms of Moloch, and they have a little ceremony, and they have a whole bunch of drums and people that sing out and things like that as the ceremony goes. And what they do is, this is a bronze statue, okay? And the statue has, like I said, the arms are made out of bronze. So bronze is a metal that heats up quick. It also holds cold, holds heat and cold very well. But it's very sturdy, and it takes extreme temperatures to melt it. So anyway, there's the baby. They lay it in the arms, and hopefully the baby's all nice and comfortable and warm in its little swaddling clothes, and it's doing okay. Because what happened is, after that, after they put it in the arms, then the people light the fire under it. This big mound of sticks and rock, and the sticks and logs and wood and all kind of things underneath of it, and stuff that lights pretty quickly, sort of like paper products, whatever, chaff, things like that. They're all placed underneath the arms, and this little baby starts feeling the heat, and it heats up fast. And as it's heating up, the drums start beating. And why do the drums beat? It's for the people to start yelling. And why are the drums beating and the people yelling and they're blowing on trumpets? Why is all that noise happening? Because the baby's screaming at the top of their lungs. The baby is screaming at the top of its lungs, and they want to drown it out because that would be too much. I don't know why it's not too much anyway, but it's too much for the people to handle. They stand there and do this worship. This is the ultimate sacrifice. They offer their children to Moloch, to the fire. They offer them by fire. Unbelievable. What's God have to say about it? God talked about it. He said that it was an abomination to him, and such a strong abomination that it had never even entered the mind of God that to do such a thing, to burn your children in fire. That is about as sick as it gets. And God said it was an abomination, and that it never entered his mind even for such a thing to ever be done. And yet we think God has entered it in his mind, even from creation, that if we don't believe in him, that we are going to be, we're all God's children, are we not? Is anybody going to argue that? That we're going to burn in fire forever. You know, this little kid, thank God, it probably died in a few minutes of being scorched to death. It's in the wide open. It didn't get to suffocate to death and go to sleep first. Sick people. Think about that. And God's going to do that to billions of children who rejected him, or millions, or whatever you want to do. You know, it's always the same thing. The tiny minority don't get burned up forever. The majority do. God loses. I think you need to read what love is in 1 John or 2 John, or both, where John talks about love casting out all fear. There is no fear in love, and yet we are fearful that we're not going to make it and be burning forever. And why we don't get the wages of sin is death, and whoever believes in him shall not perish, which means it's perish or eternal life, people. Paul said this mortal must put on immortality. If you're mortal, you don't live forever. And that's what they have us doing, living forever in hellfire. What is the argument? That we're resurrected, turned back into life, and then we're given eternal life and then cast into hell? That's the only way it would work. And God said it never even entered his mind to do it. And yet we preach it in his name. Sick. And I'm not keeping quiet about it anymore. We're out of time. It's time to stop preaching this foolishness. And anybody you watch that says God gave them a message about people burning in hell, you know not only are they false people, but they probably have demons in them. Because it's straight from the pits of hell, so to speak. It's straight from Satan's mouth. I'd hate to see the correction that God has to give people who said that they had visions or whatever, people in hell or whatever, when they never did, because God didn't send it to them. That's for sure. All right, back to the lovely Moloch worship, burning your children in the fire. What Israel finally did in that hideous place is, I guess they wanted to make sure they never did it there again. They turned it into a dump, the city dump. All the trash, can you imagine all the trash from one city going to one place out in the open? That's where all of Israel's trash went, to the Valley of Hinnom. And they would burn this trash. And it was trash, garbage, meaning, it was an agricultural community. A lot of vegetables and fruits, and a lot of sheep skins, and a lot of different kind of animals, and also dead people. Dead people were thrown in there. Usually they were poor criminals who died in jail or whatever, and they did not have any place to bury them. There was no burial plot for them. They would be thrown in Gehenna fire. Okay? So, the people of that time, and it stank, all right, and it was constantly breeding worms and different things like that. Throw trash out. Leave it for 2 weeks and throw a dead animal out with it, a rat. Watch the worms in 2 weeks surrounding all of it. Okay? When Jesus says the fire is not quenched and the worm never dies, okay, that was a saying they had at the time about the Valley of Gehenna, because there was always worms constantly, because there was always trash there, and dead bodies, dead flesh. And the fire was constantly burning. It was a fire that was not quenched. Gehenna is the New Testament name for the Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna. So when he talks about Gehenna fire, he's not talking about an eternal place of torment at all. And when you think how silly it is, when you really think of it, he talks about if your hand offends you, cut it off and put it in Gehenna fire, then have your whole body burn there. Do you think he's talking about a place of eternal torment there? Because he says, or you could enter life, missing a hand or an eye. You think you're actually going to spend time in eternal life missing limbs and stuff like that because it's sinned? I don't think so. I think we can get enough from the Bible to show that we're made perfect later. We're made as God. A lot of these things make no sense if you think them through. But let's just talk about this Gehenna. 12 times, 12 out of the 24, half. He used the term Gehenna fire. So this fire burned constantly, 24/7. And the Bible also says that certain fires in the Old Testament were never quenched. I think Sodom and Gomorrah, that fire was never quenched, and it was eternal fire. I think the New Testament calls it eternal fire too. They suffered eternal fire. Is it still burning? We have 3 words that I know of at least in the Bible. What is the one? Ad, Hebrew. Olam, Hebrew. Aeon, Aeonios, Greek. These are all nouns and adjectives, or nouns and verbs. I'm not good with English terms, I'm sorry. Which mean forever or ever. Okay? Forever and forever, and then the word, you know what I mean? For, and then the word ever, and then forever. Forever and ever. You ever think about how wrong that is? That's got to be a bad translation. You have to think about it. And he shall reign forever and ever. Isn't forever long enough? How can you have more than forever on top of ever? Well, when you understand aeonios and aeon, you understand what they really mean. Means Let's go to a simpler case. The Hebrew equivalents of what I'm talking about, Joseph set up a pillar to God. It was like so many stones, 7 stones, whatever he picked up and put it as a pillar, as a memorial to God forever and ever. Okay, is it there to this day? I don't think so. I don't think 6 stones or whatever they were are still sitting there. David was told that he would abide in his palace, in his house forever. Is he still living there today? Or is David dead and buried? He's not living there today. There's all kind of instances of forever that really don't mean forever. They mean until the conditions change. Israel was given a covenant that would last forever until the new covenant came. The old covenant, that time for that is over. These are limited time periods that unfortunately did not translate well into 1611 English. I don't know what words or set of words should be used, but forever and ever should not be used, because that's not what it means, folks. So when you take all that into consideration, there isn't one time where we talk about eternal fire or torment or anything in the Bible where it literally means forever. Never. All right? There are sufficient words to put that together in the Hebrew and Greek, but it's never expressed. And no one ever takes the time to look at it because they're so brainwashed to think, oh, hell's a real place. I don't even have to look this up. All 12 times Jesus was referring to Gehenna fire. They knew exactly what it was. They knew there was always worms there. They knew the fire was never quenched because it kept burning and burning and burning. Eventually it ran out of material, and it's a park today. It's a beautiful park in Israel today. It's like our landfill. We filled it in, they filled it in, and now it's a nice area to take your kids to play. Whereas one time the kids were burned by fire in it. So Gehenna fire had a lot of meaning for the people of Israel. They knew about Moloch worship. They knew about the dump site. They knew what he was talking about. None of them took it as eternal punishment. Trust me. You wouldn't either once you understand all the words and what they really mean. So that still leaves 12 words that are translated hell in the New Testament. The next most common one is the word Hades. Hades. Guess what that is? That's the exact equal of, I'm sorry, not Hades. Boy, I'm losing it here. Let's go to one other exception and I'll come back to it. There's one word that's different than all the rest. One of the 12 remaining. And that is in 2 Peter. Okay? And that means it talks about the angels who left their first estate and so on and so forth, and they were reserved into hellfire, I think is how it's written. You can see it, it's in 2 Peter. And it is the word is Tartaros, and it is a place, again, that's a perfect example. They are reserved and chains there forever. But we know in the book of Revelation that they are released from that area. That forever is only for a certain duration period of time. Okay? And yes, they are in darkness and probably in torment now in that area because any torment is actually separation from God. When you really get down to it, if there's any kind of torment, all right, is to be alive and separated from God. And that's what those certain fallen angels are being held in right now. It's very clear, very easy once you take a few minutes and look at the Greek. All right. The other 11 times, whatever the Greek is, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on it. It means the same as Hades in the Old Testament. All right. It simply means the grave, the place where you bury people. That's all. That covers every single time hell is mentioned in the Bible. Okay? Every single time. And when we get to the one place that's left, really, which is Lazarus and the rich man, and Lazarus is talking to a guy supposedly in Abraham's bosom who is in torment in this flame. We're going to get there and show you how ridiculous that is to think it's real. All right? It is ridiculous to think it's real. And I'm going to prove it's a parable. Not something you should believe right up hand. Now, I'll tell you what, if you have a problem with Lazarus and the rich man, do me a favor, read up on it before we come to it. Luke 16. Read a little bit before, because I want you to get some context. Who's there, who he's talking to. All right, I think it's chapter 16. I mean, right at the beginning of chapter 16. Just start there and go on to finish the whole thing with Lazarus and the rich man, and make sure you finish the story of Lazarus and the rich man. It goes on a little bit farther than the preachers always go in church. All right, make sure you're done with the story. And I want you to, once you're looking at it, I want you to think as you're going through there, if it's literal, what are the conditions that allowed Lazarus to go to paradise and the rich man to go to hell, so to speak, if that's what you believe? What are the conditions that qualified each one for that position? And then you look at that from a perspective of, is that what gets you into heaven or gets you into hell? So I'm going to end this here because I'm going to go into much more detail from questions from you. You can say, what about this? What about that? I'll answer them the best I can. But I'm telling you, if you pick up anything with Jesus saying Gehenna fire, I want you to go online and look up the history of Gehenna, that valley, Moloch worship, and it'll all fall into place for you. You can actually find videos that explain it very well. But modern, secular Christianity doesn't want to hear that because it takes away their power. And people just don't want to admit they're wrong, and people have this haughtiness where they're up here. I'm better than the rest. I don't have to suffer eternal fire. It's not the way to think as Christians, people. Hell does not exist. It is a manifestation of paganism and pagan philosophy. Period. Paganism and philosophy. Period. 3 P's. Triple P. Has nothing to do with the Bible, guys. And we've allowed secularism, the Catholic Church in particular, the Jerome time period, things like that, to infiltrate and get into what we think is a good translation of the Bible and things like that. Now, I do believe that the King James Version was taken from the best text you can take it from. I have no doubts about that. The problem is somebody should go in who doesn't know anything at all about Christianity, okay, who doesn't know a thing about Christianity, and translate that from the original Greek and Hebrew into English. And you're going to end up with a much different Bible. One thing is, you're never going to get the word hell for the grave. And you're not going to get hell in place of Gehenna fire either.